Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today, I realized there's a few episodes I've been kind of going sequentially and picking up episodes that I never spoke about, and somehow there's a few along the way that I missed. And recently it came to my attention that I had not really covered the Matchmakers, which was in season 3, episode 16, where Corabeth is introduced into the series. So today I'm going to talk about the Matchmakers. If you're enjoying these various different segments, please do hit like and subscribe. This episode was written by John McGreevy, who wrote so many wonderful episodes for our show, and was directed by Jack Shea, who directed 8 episodes over the first 3 seasons, and this was the last one of the Waltons that he directed. Pretty much at the beginning of this episode, there's a shot. It's, I believe, meant to be a night scene, and it's kind of a wide shot, and you see the sky is sort of light in the background. But I also noticed there was this these power lines up in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, and it made me wonder whether I've talked sometimes about how when cameras were more square in terms of the frame and TVs were square, that when looking through the lens, the camera operator could see where the frame for like the TV was, and then he could see, the perimeter of that, but knew that those aspects were going to be not in frame. So if there was a microphone that was just on the edge and he could see it, but he could see it wasn't going to be seen on the TV, he didn't worry about it. So it could be that those power lines originally weren't visible, but now, because they're showing more of the frame, we're seeing things we weren't meant to see before. It's nighttime at the Walton house, and Ike comes by and brings Corabeth, who is John's cousin, and her mother has just died, and she says she is on her way to Richmond to look for a position, and she's going to stay there. But she wanted to know if she could break her trip and stay at the Waltons for just a little bit of time. Of course, being the Waltons, John says, of course she can stay. You can see that Grandma's got some misgivings about this. And John turns to John Boy and says, take her things up to your room. And John Boy, of course, he knows what's coming. His reaction is just priceless. And Corabeth sort of says, oh, well, I'm so sorry to be putting you out. And he goes,
oh, no, it's really just a guest room. I only stay there when we're not having visitors.
Which, of course, is not really true. But he always did get kicked out of his room whenever we did have guests. Grandma's sense is that Corabeth plans to make herself at home and is unlikely to be of any help, which soon proves to be the case. John Boy needs a few things from his room, and he's worried about disturbing her, and they're kind of like, well, it's your room, go get your things that you need. So he goes and he knocks, and he is shocked to see that Corabeth has pretty much redecorated John Boy's room with her own things and moved things aside and put his things in a box, and is basically, he says, oh, okay, well, I just need these things. And she said, oh, well, you should just take them all, so save yourself the trouble. So John Boy realizes that Corabeth has pretty much moved herself in with no indication of how long she's planning to stay. Soon Corabeth has pretty much dominated the whole house. She's playing the piano, which is lovely, but Grandpa and Ben really want to listen to the radio. They want to listen to, I think it was Edgar Bergen, Charlie McCarthy, something like that. But Corabeth just keeps playing, and so they're having to be polite, and but it's a little frustrating for them. At Ike's store, John is in there, and he asks about Corabeth, and he's really sort of taken with her and wants to send some chocolates for her. So basically, John sort of invites Ike to come to dinner and to perhaps have an opportunity to visit and see Corabeth. The Baldwin sisters stopped by one day, and Olivia did not expect them, and they said, that they had run into Corabeth, and she invited them to come for tea. And Corabeth, she forgot to mention to Olivia and Grandma that she had invited them. But she just sort of, yes, she's playing the grand hostess and having the Baldwins, and just feels free to make it her own home. Meanwhile, Erin is going through a spell of feeling sorry for herself because she's the middle child and nobody notices her. Mary Ellen is bossy and loud and, and funny, and so everybody pays attention to her. And Elizabeth is the baby, so she gets all kinds of attention. But Erin's just sort of stuck in the middle and nobody notices her, and she doesn't think anybody would notice if she disappeared and all of that. Probably nobody knows her name. And John Boy just thinks this is all really ridiculous. But he says, okay, tomorrow, get dressed up and we're going someplace. But he won't tell Erin what it's about. Once Corabeth is sort of out of ear range, the grown-ups are sort of talking about her and how she doesn't seem to have any interest in moving on. And all of a sudden she's not at all talking about Richmond or getting a position. And Grandma feels like, no, she is just planning to stay here. John mentions that he has invited Ike to dinner, and clearly a little bit of matchmaking going on there. After the dinner that they have, where Ike just is so tongue-tied around her, he doesn't know what to say, and she's not helping the situation at all. And they're sitting after dinner on the porch, just silent. And interesting that in this episode, our initial take on Corabeth is how sort of meek and shy she sort of is. But you do see little signs of that other side of Corabeth when she tells John Boy to go ahead and take his things from the room. And she plays the grande dame with the Baldwin sisters coming over. So we know that other side of Corabeth is in there and is just sort of needed an opening for it to just come fully out. And obviously once she married Ike and felt more secure in her life and was, the proprietress of this store, and she could start having more and more grand ideas about her life. And so the Corabeth we came to know and love definitely emerged. John Boy takes Erin into Charlottesville, which is this outing where he's had her get dressed up, and he's going to take her to have her photograph taken. And Erin's is sort of demurring and saying, oh, well, you shouldn't spend your money. And was this the money that you were going to do, blah, blah, blah. And he says, I want to do this. And so she goes into this photographer's, and there's a little girl there who's very uncomfortable about the idea of having her picture taken. And her mother leaves to go take care of something. And Erin helps the little girl and sort of changes the way her hair is being done and gets her feeling more comfortable. And between Erin and John Boy, they help the little girl just sort of brighten up and come out of her shell. And they end up, therefore, the photographer is able to get some just lovely pictures of the little girl. This scene made me think that really this episode is about self-image. Erin is having a problem with her self-image. This little girl that she helps is having trouble. And when Erin is able to look at someone outside of herself, then she's able to help someone else with that. We have Corabeth, who is struggling with her self-image. She doesn't know who she is and where she belongs. She wants to have this genteel life that doesn't exist for her. And, she's trying to figure out where she fits in the world. And for the most part, the Waltons always seemed pretty comfortable about who they were. But we did see each of the characters at some point, maybe with the exception of Grandpa, maybe a little bit also not so much with Grandma, but we saw John, we saw Olivia, we saw each of the children at some point go through a little bit of a struggle in finding themselves and finding their path. And I think that is a very common theme for all of us, and maybe not always in our life, but certainly at points in our life when we have that uncertainty about ourselves. Ike asks John Boy for advice about how to talk to Corabeth because he realizes how tongue-tied he gets whenever he's around her. And Ike ends up asking, he wants to invite Corabeth to dinner, and Corabeth is uncomfortable with that. And he says he wants to invite John and Olivia as well because he thinks that'll make Corabeth more comfortable, and Ike's going to pay. And so John and Olivia basically say, okay, and they're going to go to this really nice French restaurant. John Boy has given in and has decided to give Ike some help. He gives him a book of quotes and maybe so something that perhaps Ike could pull from. He says, well, just, maybe it'll be a conversation starter. So at the dinner, when John and Olivia go to dance, Ike originates a quote from George Bernard Shaw.
Two may talk and one may hear, but three may not take part in the conversation of the most sincere and searching kind.
And he says something, and Corabeth wasn't really paying attention, and she turns and goes, "What?" And Ike said, "Oh, well, it was just, it was something from a writer, George Bernard Shaw, that I thought you might be interested in." She's like, "Who?" And I thought at the time that George Bernard Shaw seemed like an author that later on I had the sense that it was somebody that Corabeth would have been aware of. But as we all know, Corabeth put on a lot of airs. So I think sometimes she liked to pretend like she knew a lot of things that perhaps really she wasn't as worldly and educated and well-read and all of that as she asserted to be and wanted to give the impression of. This after dinner is the scene that is so iconic of Corabeth, where she comes hurrying into the house crying, and they're like, what happened? She said, "Ike asked me to marry him, and I said yes." That came to be, to me, a defining moment of Corabeth in this episode. Although John was instrumental in bringing Ike and Corabeth together, he begins to have second thoughts about how quickly Ike has proposed to Corabeth, and he's a little worried that this might not be a harmonious marriage, and all the things that Ike is going to have to give up with his bachelorhood, that Corabeth's not an easy woman, and it'll mean a lot of changes and things like that, and is afraid that maybe Ike is making a mistake. But Ike basically says, in a really side of Ike that we didn't see a lot, he talks about how he's lonely and he doesn't want to continue to do all these things and live alone, that he knows there'll be some tough times, but he feels like that will make his life richer than continuing to just have this sad, lonely existence that he feels like he has. Olivia comes with Corabeth when Ike is showing her around the living quarters there and saying that he can expand them or he can make changes. He got this chair that he thinks will be comfortable. And Ike's just trying so hard to please her, and Corabeth is being so sort of dismissive about things, and clearly she's not sure and comfortable herself, and is very intimidated and I think self-conscious and embarrassed about this decision she's made, but feeling like this is probably her best choice, and she knows they want her out of the house. So it's a really tough situation for her too. I really felt for her in this. But she does, when he says he wanted it to feel like a home to her, she does call him Ike in this moment. And which was something that I saw even in later episodes. People have asked, why did she always call him Mr. Godsey? I think that was still part of her airs and her affectations about living this genteel life and being this person that she imagined and wanted to be, this all like aristocrat almost. And that I think it was her idea of how a woman like that, a lady in another era who was in an upper social strata, would behave, that she would refer to her husband as Mr. or Lord or my Lord or whatever. I think it was her concept of something like that. But in more personal moments, and when there were these softer moments between them, she did call him Ike. Corabeth does have second thoughts, and she's like packing her things and she's going to be leaving. And Olivia comes in and talks with her and just gives her a different perspective. And I think that really sort of helps Corabeth work out her path forward. Mostly, Corabeth feels like what she really wants is a marriage like John and Olivia's, with someone that she can love and respect and really be a partner with. And she doesn't necessarily feel that that's what she's going to have with Ike. And I think she knows she's going to be settling, but not sure that she would ever have the opportunity to have the kind of marriage that John and Olivia have. Meanwhile, Ike is also having second thoughts, and so then John gives him advice as well. So John and Olivia are sort of the matchmakers in here and try and help smooth the way for Ike and Corabeth. We arrive at the wedding sequence, and John is going to be the best man. Corabeth, with the Walton women and the Baldwin sisters, manages to gather something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue. And Grandma gives her a blue garter that she wore, and Mary Helen breaks out in a laugh and rolls her eyes in a classic moment there. She just, I can't imagine having a thought about Grandma wearing a blue garter, I'm sure. But then we go into the wedding, and this was the only time we saw John Ritter in this episode. He officiates at the wedding, and we don't really hear him say anything, but we see Corabeth arriving, coming down the aisle. And then next thing we know, the wedding has happened, and they're coming out, and things are being, thrown in wedding tradition. And so the beginning of Mr. and Mrs. Godsey here in this episode, The Matchmakers. The guests in this episode, of course, Ronnie Claire Edwards being introduced as Corabeth, Joe Conley as Ike, Mary Jackson and Helen Kleeb as the Baldwin sisters, and then Rebecca was Audrey Barronday. Mrs. Cook, the mother, was Lana Saunders, and you might recognize her from Days of Our Lives as Marie Horton. And John Locke was Belden, the photographer, who you might have seen in any number of Westerns over the years. And last but not least, of course, I mentioned that John Ritter was back just for that one glimpse in the church when he was going to officiate the wedding. Thank you for joining me for this segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons as I pick up this missing episode from season 3, The Matchmakers. I'll be back with more behind the scenes of the Waltons and more of your questions in an Ask Judy, and hopefully I have some more special guests on the horizon for you. Thanks for watching.